Supplies for this project will include paper. I used a piece from a mixed media sketchbook, but you can get regular paper or even construction paper. Water-based markers, I used Crayola Brights and the regular traditional pack, the basics I think it's called, and then a spray bottle with water in it. And you can use the black from the basics pack of Crayolas or an ultrafine Sharpie or even just a finer tip black marker of any kind. A blow dryer or a heat gun embossing heat gun is okay as well, or recommended, but not required, because this project can be put out to dry and then let it dry on its own and then come back to it. But if you want to be able to speed up through the process quickly, then you would need to be able to dry it with blow dryer. For this project, we'll be working on Watercolor Zentangles. When I did this project, I created it in two different ways. The first was for elementary aged kids, preschoolers, younger kids. This could be done by anybody. And the focus was to create patterns within areas. I focused a lot on shapes with the younger kids because that's a lot of what they're learning and how to create a pattern. And then with the older kids, I focused really on creating organic shapes and more detailed patterns within the artwork. I'll be linking my Teachers Pay Teachers account onto this video so that if you need help with patterns or information, learning materials to teach this to your students or even your child, there will be a worksheet to have students create their own patterns in addition to already filled in patterns. I will also be including a PowerPoint and some various other learning materials that I use in my classroom with my students when I do this project. Alright, so before we get started, this project can take a day. It could take what would be maybe a little more than a class period for the older kids. It could take a little bit longer. The main thing that's going to affect your time that this project takes is dry time. So I recommend a blow dryer to speed things up if you're at home, but it's not required. So for this project, I chose to start with the Brights from the Crayola packs. I just really like the colors. I think they're really pretty. And when I did the originals, I did this two ways. I did geometric shapes, and then on the other half of the page, I just did color blocks. So I'm going to show a bunch of different ways of doing this in the video, but I'm starting with some just basic color blocks of shapes. This is really good for when you're teaching the younger students to let them focus on their different shapes. If you have really little ones like preschoolers or even maybe a little bit younger, because you could do this with at least with all ages, they can scribble all over their page. Just I would limit them to a couple different colors because you will eventually end up with a muddy mess when you get the water out if you have too many colors. So you can see I've done a variety of shapes and lines and color blocks. You can also see that I have put some plastic wrap underneath my paper. That's because I'm on a white vinyl and I was trying to protect it, but usually because it's water-based markers, they come off the tables fairly easily, but you could also do this outside just to help protect your surfaces. Now, when we get ready to use our water, you need to come up from a high surface because you don't want a ton of water on your paper because it is paper and it'll absorb, and just do a couple of sprays. You can see immediately that because it's water-based markers that the water starts, or the marker starts to spread out, and you can kind of see my spray. It's a little bit of a mess, so again, I would just be cautious. Once you have gotten enough water on there that you can see that your marker is starting to move around, then this would be the time for you to pick up your paper, swirl around your color however you want. Again, careful of where your paints are going. Once you kind of have your paint spread out how you want it to go, then the next step is going to be to get your blow dryer out. So you'll need to grab that blow dryer, plug it in, or even if you want, you could get a straw and use the straw to blow paint around to kind of dry it and blow it at the same time. This would also be the step where you can just set it outside to dry or leave it on a table to dry without using the blow dryer. But you can see I grabbed my blow dryer. I can use the air from the blow dryer. I have it on a lower setting so paint doesn't go everywhere. But I use that to help kind of push those colors around, to blend them, to create areas of interesting paint dried shapes. Now that our watercolor background is done, I took this page and folded it in half and then just trimmed it to make 2 pages. You can keep it whole if you'd like. It gives the kids more space to work. It will take longer if you keep it whole, just because there's more space. But for the sake of this video and being able to create a work of art for you, I split it into half. So I ended up with 2 works of art. So now that I have both of my pieces, I'm going to show you how I did both of these. So for the younger level kids, younger age kids, I use just the black marker that came from the Crayola pack. And for the older kids, I give them a Sharpie pen, a really fine point marker, a micron. Any of those work well. If it's not available, then use the big Sharpie. It's okay. As long as art is being made, it's all right. So I'm going to start with the younger age project. So you can see that I created a bunch of different shapes on this, and then I divided my canvas into various spaces to create our patterns. The focus really is on patterns and shapes for the younger kids. So just with my black marker, I went in, I created these different geometric shapes. You can really talk about geometric or organic with the students. Focusing on organic comes from nature, where geometric is usually always has straight edges, which you don't usually find in nature. Don't mind my star, it's a little sad. So once I've got all of my shapes done, then I start to create the separations between them. So I connect every single shape in some way. It doesn't have to be straight. This is where you can talk about organic lines, organic shapes with the curved lines. And I just go through and I connect everything. And then once I've connected all of them, then I work on creating the divisions that go out to the edge of the paper. So separating it out all the way so they have a bunch of different blocks to work on. You could even break up some of those larger spaces between the shapes if you wanted. It's really up to the kids and how they want to separate it out. I really suggest trying to let them do as much on their own as possible, seeing as it is their own artwork. You can help give suggestions. They don't always love them, but it's always worth a shot. After I've done all of this, then I'm going to start working in those spaces that are not my shapes and start adding in those patterns. So there's various different types of patterns that they can do. Because of age, I would try and stick to simple patterns that include shapes. So you can do as simple as just a bunch of dots and circles, or you can also do patterns that repeat by row or repeat square, square, circle, square, square, circle over and over again. It's really up to you. So for this first one, I'm just doing some basic dots. I followed the curve of the box that I was working in, so it curves up a little bit. It just makes it look like it's meant to be there and that it's not this weird pattern that's being thrown into a box. So for this next pattern, I decided to do something that alternated a square and then 2 dashes, a square and 2 dashes, and I go all the way across. You'll also notice as I do this, I have squares that are not complete. That's where you can talk about what would a pattern look like if it hit a line, how does that change it. I did partial underneath, and I just continued with the pattern. I alternated starting it with the square and the dashes just so it didn't look like the same thing all the way up, but I made it look like it was continuous. It was meant to fill that space, and that when that new line came, it stopped, it chopped my pattern in half. That's a really good way of explaining it to younger kids as well. So I'm not going to finish this entire one right now, but here is what I got done today and then what I had done yesterday. Now time for the big kids. So I'm going to switch over to my Sharpie marker. What the big thing I focus with the older kids is creating the organic shape. So I do this by making a big swirl design and then focusing on where the lines overlap will create the new pattern, but it doesn't ever represent one particular thing. It's all a bunch of lines that just overlap each other, so it makes it look more organic. So you can see I'm just doing a bunch of swirls. You can specify, I usually say it has to have at least 5 loops, but you can specify however many you want. You can see that when I ended it, I went all the way to the end. I pulled up some of my points so that it divided out my paper a little bit more. You can do that or you don't have to. It's completely up to them on how much they want to do. On my example, you can also see that I left the outer edges blank where I have also done this, and I filled the entire page so that the whole thing has Zentangles all over it. Again, that's really up to the student, the child, on what they really want to do. So when I do this, I go through and I pick a loop, a space, and I start my Zentangle pattern. The one thing that, because with the Sharpie at least, when you're going really quickly, it doesn't stay as bold as it normally does. So a lot of times I'll go through and I will re-outline the loop that I'm working on just to bold my lines a little bit. Also with the older kids, it's really good to talk about some of their principles of design. So you've got shape and line when you're talking about elements, and then when you're talking about your principles, contrast is a really big one. A lot of times Zentangles are just black and white, and you have that contrast of the black and the white. In this one, you have the contrast of the color and the black. So I really like to focus on the older kids having spaces that get filled in with black, not just all the white spaces, and that could just be the lines. It just really depends on what it is that they are choosing to do for that space. You can see in some of the ones that don't have that big bold line, it's a little bit harder to see them, at least at this distance. You can see it better up close, but it gets lost a little bit, where if you have the darker areas, it looks really nice. So you can see I'm outlining again, just to bold that line a little bit. I won't finish this entire Zentangle right now. The example one did take me at least 2 hours to finish, an hour to 2 hours to finish. So this project can take a few days, especially for the older kids. I would break it up. Don't overwhelm them. So you can see how this project worked out for the younger kids. It really lets them learn their shapes, and then it really pushes the older kids to get really creative, find new patterns, and to push their skills a little bit. But everybody has a lot of fun with this project. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed making some art with me.